All right, welcome everyone. Welcome. My name is Corey. I'm the program manager for Interfaith Relations with Interfaith Works. Interfaith Works is a social justice nonprofit based here in Olympia, Washington. We are a coalition of 30 plus diverse faith communities, and we're also the largest provider of social services for adults, vulnerable adults experiencing homelessness in Olympia. This is Lean in Olympia. We are broadcasting twice a month on the first, second, and fourth Tuesdays of the month. These are conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. And if you want to check out past episodes, you can do that or stay up to date with what Interfaith Works is doing on our website, on our Facebook page, and YouTube channel. So welcome. Glad you're here. And I want to welcome our guest today, Mo Golden. Hello, Mo.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Good. Glad you're here. We were just getting a little bit fired up with some 2020 year conversations, so we're all primed, ready for a conversation. Mo, I want to just read some introductory from your websites and then ask you to comment on that.
Sure.
So you are the co-founder of Gold Herring, and we're going to talk more about this business in a moment. It's so expressive of who you are, and I look forward to talking about that. Mo is an artist and educator with expertise in designing interdisciplinary curriculum and immersive learning and interactive products. She holds a Master's of Arts in Education and Human Development from the George Washington University and a certification in person-centered expressive arts therapy with a concentration using the arts in cross-cultural and coaching contexts. Mo is an Evergreen State College alum. We were just talking about that.
Yeah.
And has lived and worked and taught in Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Spain, Ecuador, and Nicaragua.
Minus Brazil.
Oh, did you
No.
travel there?
No Brazil.
Oh, okay. Well, someday.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
I did study with a lot of people from Brazil in Argentina, so
okay.
maybe.
Sorry if I got that wrong.
No worries.
That's still an impressive list. Yeah, and there's tons more that we could add to your bio and what you've done and how you've been trained and the things that you're doing. So welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess I would love to start with Gold Herring. This is the business of which you're a co-founder. And I wanted to offer you the first salvo at describing the business, and then I'd like to give some perspective on how I've encountered the business through talking with you and meeting with you recently.
Sure, yeah. So I am the co-founder of Gold Herring, where we make immersive products to deepen people's connection with Jewish wisdom and Jewish culture. And my co-founder, Amanda Herring, is in Washington, D.C., and we met in our grad program, which was in experiential education and Jewish cultural arts. So we both kind of have an overlap of interest in the Jewish professional world and also using immersive and experiential education in the Jewish space. And what we're doing that's kind of unique in that space is creating products. There's a huge movement right now in Jewish experiential education, but the educators are somewhat isolated from one another, and they're all kind of creating their own curriculum, and there aren't a lot of resources for beautiful designed finished products that they can just pick up and use. So that was kind of the inspiration at first for our business, and that's still definitely like one of the channels of what we're doing is really serving Jewish educators. But now we've also expanded to making Jewish educational experiences accessible to everyone, even if you don't have a facilitator, if you don't have access to Jewish spaces. So like we have a tea experience, for example, and it comes with organic herbal tea and a booklet that talks about the Hebrew month and has mindfulness activities. So if you're a Jewish educator, you can pick this up and you have a lesson plan done for you. But if you want to just pick it up and have a dinner party with your friends and nobody, knows the prayers or speaks Hebrew or knows what Hebrew month it is, everything is just there for you and you can open it and have an immersive Jewish experience.
Yeah, and that accessibility piece that you're talking about from our conversation last week, I really want to dig into that more later in the conversation. And I also just want to note that one of the central products, it seems like, in your business is the planner that you offer that was started through was it what do you call the funding when you
Kickstarter through a crowdfunding
campaign, which was largely held up by a lot of good Olympia folk too, which is cool. And that was back in 2017.
I think it was like January 2018. Or no, it was January 2019, and we started in 18 kind of planning it. So we have a paper planner, and it has teachings about each Hebrew month and the Hebrew year as a whole, and then has the offset dates because the Hebrew day starts at sundown. The Gregorian day starts at midnight. So there's this confusion. So we have it lined up so people can understand that. And we talk about, how Jewish time actually works, which is something that, a lot of people who've done a lot of tech study and Jewish, deep Jewish study don't understand. And so that's another piece that we're just trying to bring to make accessible and transparent for people. You might know the what of like, oh, this holiday is at, on this new moon, but you don't know the why of it, that like how all these things interact or how the year is even conceived in the Hebrew calendar. So that was kind of the goal with that. And then it has like, a place to make appointments and all those practical pieces too. And there's journal prompts. So is this kind of marriage of the spiritual and the earth-based wisdom and the practical. And one of the things that we thought about with that planner is like, our lives are Jewish, but they're also not Jewish. And like, we're all engaged in the secular world or in other even spiritual communities. There's a lot of interfaith couples who are doing, some religious holiday and Jewish holidays. So we wanted the planner to walk between those worlds with us and be a Jewish planner that also held all of your appointments and deadlines and everything and showed you how it could be contextualized in a Jewish calendar space.
Yeah, and it's also it's beautiful too. You gave me a copy of it. It's about yay big and it's very hardy. I think the binding is just beautiful. The quality of the pages, everything about it makes you want to engage with it. And I loved when we were talking about it, like after you've done all this intentionality with like the beauty of it, making it a physical thing to hold. People are like, this is great. Do you have an app?
Yeah.
And you're like, no, we have this, no app.
Yeah, we have the opposite of an app. Like, let's get physical.
Opposite of an app. So I really do encourage y'all to check those out on Gold Herring website. They are really, really beautiful. And I think, I don't live by the Jewish calendar, but it's a part of my life through the interfaith community that I work with as well. And I can really see how having a guide with you on that path, which is not the culturally dominant one, just recognized through commerce and all those kinds of things, would be really grounding, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, and I've had some feedback too from people who are not Jewish and also have no experience with Judaism. Like some of my friends just bought the planner to be supportive, and what I've learned through them is that actually we're all living, like the Hebrew calendar is based on essential, natural, true things about like the way the seasons change and the way the plants change. And so it actually does have like universal wisdom of just how to be a human on earth kind of built into the calendar. So I think it is like an interesting, useful perspective for everyone.
Yeah, I just got it last week and I'm looking forward to spending more time with it. Thank you for offering it to me. And you, on the website for Gold Herring, you talk about Gold Herring being a woman-owned, woman-run business. And then the last time when I met with you, you also described the business as being feminine-led.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if you could sort of explore each of those and how those might be distinct, or where there might be overlay between those two qualities that you go out of your way to name on the website, and then that you named as sort of even a spiritual component to what is how you're conceiving of this business and offering.
Totally. Yeah. I think, just surface level, there needs to be more women in leadership. And part of that is people making space for women. And part of that is women feeling entitled and welcome and making that space for themselves. And I think those things go hand in hand. And for me and Amanda, we made that space for ourselves. And we're just choosing to have these leadership roles in our organization and start that. And I think that that's something that is possible because we've had other women model that for us. And that has, and that we're learning to be leaders as women, which is something that, we've had some modeling of, but are also trying to step into that modeling. And then in terms of the what does female or what does women leadership look like is a bigger question that the world hasn't really answered for us and hasn't really modeled. Like, I feel like even today, the role models that I've gotten is like very first wave feminism of like, oh, I can like act like a dude and then like, you know, be a woman in the workplace with my shoulder pads. And what we're trying to do is really be intentional about how we show up at work and bring our full selves and our authentic selves and invite other people to do the same. And one thing that I've noticed happening naturally between me and Amanda that then we've started to cultivate is being like very collaborative at the core of what we're doing. And I think that that is something both feminine and feminist, where like we're kind of, it's not that it's non-hierarchical, because it definitely, like, there are hierarchies, but when we make decisions, it's often like pretty inefficient and maybe even messy because we're coming to consensus and we are really collaborating. And like she's often the person writing content and I'm the person creating images, but we're enmeshed in each other's process, and that like we're co-creating the ideas that she's writing, or, you know, she'll start writing and then I'll kind of like tweak it or, you know, write some journal prompts. And then Amanda's often like giving me creative direction and edits to my drawings, and like my hand is on the, you know, pen to paper, but we're really co-creating those images. And I think that's how we're shaping the business. That's how we're leading our team. And we're prioritizing that like relational, collaborative environment over efficiency sometimes, or, you know, over like getting it done, somebody being in charge. And I think, I don't know how scalable that is. Like I said, we don't really have models, but that's something that I'm like excited about, is like seeing how we can scale that and how we can have that kind of real communal, collaborative, relational environment as we grow.
Thank you for that. And because we also talked about how not just in business is there a lack of models for women-led organizations, but within Judaism itself, there's also been a tradition, though not a doctrine, of exclusion, at least in some denominations, of women having some of those prominent leadership roles.
Yeah.
So we've talked about that, and how your business is not a pure answer to that. It's not a response to that, but it's an expression of the capacity and the gifts of female leadership, also in reference to a tradition that has some parts of it that are a little bit exclusive. Yeah, that kind of invented the patriarchy in many ways. Yeah. So I'm just curious, how have you talked about that with Amanda in terms of that relationship? We have talked about that, and that's something also like we've talked about with some of our organizational partnerships, and we just did a kind of collaboration with Lab Shul, which is an organization in New York, and they had this initiative during the counting of the Omer called Sisters Count, where women were counting the Omer together, and like there was definitely a lot of conversation during that time about women, and specifically women's voices, which is a topic in Judaism, you know. And yeah, I don't think, and also Rabbi Johanna Kinberg in Seattle, she's based in Olympia and Seattle, did a really good talk at this Jewish conference called Limud last year about feminism and the lack thereof in Judaism. And like, I think that I am excited about having those conversations, and I do have those conversations, but maybe this is my experiential educator self. I'm more interested in just doing it. Like it's I'm like kind of over talking about the problems or the solutions, and I'm more excited about like just creating a really inspiring alternative that will inspire other people to make their own alternatives. And I think that's what it's about, is like you said, we're not the solution at all. We are like one little pocket in the world outside of that argument. And I just like am trying to hold that vibration so that other people can just sort of like step out of the paradigm of like even arguing about this anymore. If that makes sense. Well, it totally does, because like arguing and you know, is that cerebral capacity. And we talked about this too. And you're you do immersive arts therapy.
Yeah.
And so we talk, what is immersion? What is, and the sense of coming into awareness of sensing and the body and being in that place. There are truths and wisdom that unfold in that space that are just kind of, they deconstruct.
Yes.
They deconstruct cerebral arguments, and it feels like you have such training and depth in that. And when I look at the business and what you're producing and how you're operating as an artist in that business, I get that sense that you're honoring that wisdom that comes forth from sensing and from embodiment.
Totally. And I'm also having an insight, hearing myself talk and then hearing you say that is feminine wisdom. And so like so much of what is the toxic masculinity that I perceive in Judaism is also like encapsulated in the headiness and in the like verbal only like analytical brain. And so by creating immersive embodied sensory experiences, like that actually is the sacred feminine. And like that actually alone dissolves, like you said, these issues of like, this is what's missing. And this is what's been in our tradition all along. It's not that it was a masculine tradition. It's that the documented parts and the parts that are raised up are the masculine. And then these other parts that have been happening not on the page and not as honored or raised up, but in the home are very much the sacred feminine, and they've been here all along. So just like using that wisdom and pulling that out again. That's beautiful. And this is a place of healing too, because I shared a little bit with you about some of my own story that as I went through 4 years of seminary, I was just inculcated in that cerebral place. The body was not my expressive self. My artistic self was not really valued. And when I left there, I realized I had a lot of deconstruction to do, and a lot of that mirror shown back to me was through feminine wisdom and guidance and leadership from the community that I serve in the interfaith capacity. And so I really have encountered that as a place, first of all, of some fear. Yeah. So it wasn't in my own, as I think male cerebral comfort, but there's been, with some relaxing of fear, healing that's happened through that space too, through feminine-led wisdom. It's also, I think it's really, even if you're super well versed in that work, scary, because having a body experience and a new experience, you have less control, and it's like it's a gateway to insight and to mystery and to new things, rather than when we're in our heads, like we're really just recycling thoughts and associations we've already had, which is a lot more comfortable and safe, and like not just safe feeling, but safe. And so I think that the fear doesn't go away, but that's part of like anything new, including receiving new wisdom from our bodies. And I loved how you talked about fear when we spoke, always being present at the kind of the precipice of a new artistic moment, and that sense of, to have a true artistic relationship is like that vulnerability, being open to that. And as the natural, one of the little partners in that vulnerability is some fear. It's an enlivening feeling too, but when it's there, you're on the edge of something. Yes, totally. I was teaching a painting class maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I had a lot of adult students who had never made visual art before, and this one student said something like, classic, like, oh, I'm not an artist, or I'm not creative, like at this like roadblock point in her process. And I was like, what you have done so far and what you're doing is like textbook what I would do. Like you are acting like an artist right now, and like everything you're doing is awesome. And the difference between being an artist or not being an artist is whether you continue now, because your painting is not finished and it doesn't look good. And like my paintings that are not finished don't look good either. And now's the part where you start having self-doubt and fear and shame and all those feelings that humans have, which is also part of being an artist. And like, now what are you going to do? Are you strong enough and resilient enough to move through this, gain those insights, gain that self-love and whatever comes from moving through fear and shame. And in that process, you will create something maybe beautiful, I don't know, but definitely meaningful and finished and articulate that will like mirror something back to you. And then you'll be an artist.
Yeah, I love that you laid out the promise that's there rather than just like, what they're not, because maybe that promise, which maybe a poorer word for that, but a relatable word would be a reward for going through that process, is just not known. Or at some point in childhood when you decide I'm not an artist or I can't draw, when the child starts to say that, at some point, forgetting that relationship with fear, going into the unknown, the wisdom, which is not necessarily rewarded in our culture per se, but it is at a soul level, at a human being level, to know that I've done something, I've made a connection with like the most important part of who I am and how I relate to life. That happens through art, taking that risk.
Absolutely.
So Mo, I was wondering if I could ask you about your connection with the Jewish tradition, because it's a journey, and you shared a little bit with me about it, and I was really inspired and just wanted to ask if you would share some of that with this format today and people watching and who'll be watching this. And I'll stop there, and then I had some reflections on it too, but I'll wait until after I've heard from you and what you want to share today.
Cool. Yeah. So my dad is an Ashkenazi Jew and grew up.
Can we just say what that is?
Yes.
Real quick? So,
yes. So there's lots of different kind of ethnic groups of Jews, and one of them is Ashkenazi, which is the kind of like Eastern European, and it is the highest population in the United States, but maybe not as extremely as we think, because it's mostly just the most talked about and like Eurocentricized, so we have the same sort of like marginalization problems in the Jewish world as we do in the larger world. So Ashkenazi Jews, like if you think of Seinfeld, bagels, anything you think of as Jewish probably is Ashkenazi. But there are many other groups of Jews, and there's like lots of them. It's not a little minority. There's like lots of people who are not Ashkenazi. And so there's like Sephardic Jews who are from the Mediterranean, like Spain and Italy. And then there's Ethiopian Jews and Mizrahi, which is kind of a catch-all term for Middle Eastern Jews. And it really just has to do with like when people were immigrating and where they were immigrating to. And there's other groups that I'm failing to mention that are like smaller and less talked about, and I need to get better at remembering the names of, but there are these.
I just appreciate that as a background to listeners. And so your father was Ashkenazi.
So my dad's an Ashkenazi Jew, and he grew up like very classic Ashkenazi American in Philadelphia, eating lox and bagels and going to synagogue. And my mom is Irish Catholic, and they met through a spiritual community that was, if anyone knows who Gurdjieff is, they were Gurdjieffian. And my dad was really alienated from Judaism, and I think sought out these other spiritual traditions, and namely Gurdjieffian stuff because of that. But what's like funny looking back, I was not aware of this growing up at all, but looking back, a lot of the people in that spiritual community were Jewish. And I grew up like not with many spiritual or religious Jewish traditions. I did not have a bat mitzvah. I didn't go to Hebrew school. But I grew up not only with the food traditions and like some of the holidays, but with Jewish culture, like so much, and sometimes not even being aware that that's what it was. And then I also, my given name is Goldstein, so I moved through the world with a Jewish last name, and a lot of like assumptions around my Jewish identity, which really shaped me having to have at least a public Jewish identity and explaining what Passover is in school and stuff like that. And then in my early 20s, I was making a lot of art about my ancestors and my family stories, and I was just feeling really inspired and called to connect with my ancestral lines, and I had a felt sense without any real data that like there was this legacy of immigration and forced immigration on both sides of my family, which felt like I just felt really called to heal that through art and like to explore that and heal that through my creative process. And that really dominated my 20s. That was like what I was about. And through that process, I got really connected to my Jewish ancestors, and I got really connected to their pain and also what was beneath that, like what else is there. And what else was there was a wisdom tradition, and were like lots of gifts. And and it almost felt like I almost felt embarrassed at the end of that it wasn't an end of the process, but when I got somewhere with the process, I felt almost embarrassed that I had been focusing so much on the pain. But I think, like pain in the body, it draws your attention to something. And I think the pain was like poking me until I could like go and find the gifts. And so the kind of culmination of that exploration was I was already doing experiential education. I was already doing art, but I decided to really like hunker down into the Jewish thing. And I did this grad program that was really about Jewish cultural arts and experiential education in the Jewish space. And I rolled up in that program like not knowing a lot of the words they were saying or like the references. They all knew the same Jewish funders, and they had all been to summer camp, and I was just like, what's going on? So it was like a crash course in Jewish, organized Jewish community, which was like confusing and alienating for me, but also really healing, because even though I felt like outside, I also felt at home in a way I hadn't felt. And it felt like this is my place and I want to learn this place.
So was this space that you were in with it's an organization, or was it an organization that teaches Jewish cultural heritage? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it was just a graduate program at George Washington University.
Was this one of the first times that you like were formally in Jewish space? With the intention to be known as such, wanting to explore, deepen?
Yeah, it was like,
exactly.
It was like the first time publicly like identifying as Jewish, being around other people who were like wearing Judaica jewelry, it's just like, oh, wow. This is, and I was like interning with Jewish nonprofits. So like one of my first moments in grad school was like handing out prayer books at the high holiday services for one of the biggest synagogues in DC. And I was just like, oh, I am like in the thick of this suddenly, and have like no reference points. But it was this like learning by doing crash course. And now I feel many things. So one, I feel very immersed in that now. Like I feel part of the community, fluent in the community. I also feel able to translate that for other people who are like not on the inside and who don't maybe feel welcome or included, because I like went from outside to in instead of being born in the center. And then I also, another thing that happened through that was like I was alone in my little weird process, and then this was a very like professional outside world experience of Judaism, and since then like I've been marrying those two and like integrating that like personal process, personal spirituality with like the world and the words that the world uses, and like these organizations that exist.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the story you just shared, I wanted to reflect something that I really just inspire in your story. It's inspirational to me, I should say, and that's the fact that you are finding your way and your voice in it. There's a quote that I'm not going to get it perfectly right, but it's been important to me from a 20th century religionist named Wilford Cantwell Smith, who talks about that every religion is a new religion every morning, and that religions don't exist fixed or static in the sky. Rather, they exist in the human heart. And so what I love about that is the humility of that quote, because I feel like there's a kind of a dirty little secret at the heart of many religions, that essentially people have to do it you have to do it for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a teacher, you can have a text, you can have maybe even like a guru, but eventually you wake up and the choices that you make, the person who you become is going to be from the heart, and it's going to be how you follow that.
Totally.
And when I heard your story, I remembered that quote that's been important to me, and I just thought I wanted to share that reflection with you because I see that in your journey.
Thanks. Yeah, totally. One of the Jewish values that like really feels potent in my life is this idea of wrestling with God, and like that it's not about like believing blindly in something or following it, but it's like you're living Jewishly if you're like constantly questioning, like wrestling with that question, which is what I'm hearing in that quote too, of like it is this personal lived process, and that we do need each other, and we need leaders, and we need community, but no one's gonna like do it for you. It's like, it's like this workout that we have to do for our whole life. And
I love the wrestling analogy. Of course, brings us right to Jacob and that famous story of wrestling with this man, this being, but there's also pain that happens in that engagement with the divine. We live in a world that has pain in it, and so that story itself, where Jacob becomes Israel, is just so honest too, and humble about the reality of the spiritual life, and that there's pain in it, and also it is like a grappling. It's not just like white linen tables or whatever, what have you. It's a very real, very real struggle.
Which is exactly what we were just talking about with the creative process. It's like any transformation, any insight, any healing, there's a process, and it's not set out for you. Like anyone's process is not going to be your own. Like you have to pave this path for yourself, and you will be changed on the other side, and you'll probably like it on the other side, but getting through is like, no one can make that painless for you. It's going to be painful.
Where are you experiencing that dynamic right now? Maybe in your life as an artist, or in any facet of how you want to respond?
That's a really good question. I'm definitely feeling growing pains. We're definitely experiencing growing pains, like in our business at Gold Herring. And one thing that I am confronted with every day in this business is like, it's not quite imposter syndrome. It's like actual incompetence. It's like, I don't know how to do this, and I have to do this. So it's like, I don't feel like an imposter, because like I believe I should be here, and I'm doing this, but like being a business owner, like we're making our own website. I'm running the social media. Like if you email us, I'll email you back. Like I'm doing everything, and Amanda's doing everything, and nobody is an expert at everything. So I would say like 80% of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm bad at, and I shouldn't be doing. And it's really hard. But what I've learned already by the things that we've delegated is that when I delegate something that I don't know how to do, the person fails at it, and I can't manage them. But if I learn how to do it, and even just learn how hard it is and how bad I am at it, and I understand it, then I can delegate and manage that person to do a better job than me. So that's just like a thing that I've learned, but that doesn't actually make it easier, because now I'm just mastering a bunch of things I'm bad at, so that I can maybe someday delegate them.
All right, but I want to propose another side to the coin of I'm bad at, because last week we were talking about identity, actually, and where I think I asked you a question about having confidence in spaces that are Jewish, where you said you might not have like the heritage that people might have, or the whatever, the upbringing or the background that they have in Jewish schools, Hebrew school, all that kind of stuff. So I asked you about confidence in those spaces, and one of the things that you responded to I thought was really profound is that naming that edge of knowing, which is maybe the flip side to I'm bad at. And I just kind of personally related to that, because that's a little dynamic that I try to work with too, flipping that coin over, to the trying to see the gift of disclosure.
Totally.
Of not knowing, this is where I stop. This is where I don't have I got nothing after this, but sharing that can be a real place of connection and even empowerment.
Yeah, totally. I think the struggle is exactly that. It's like how much of this work do I need to do to know what my bandwidth is and what my competence is? And like, if I'm like, I kind of have to learn InDesign to know if I'm going to be the InDesign guy, you know, and like, then I'll kind of hit a wall and be like, do I want to push past this wall, or do I want to like, is this as far as I'm going to go? And I need to communicate that, because there's been surprises. Like, there've been things that me and Amanda like knew zero about. Like for instance, like I didn't know anything about contracts, and I love writing contracts. I'm the contract person. I like did not know that. I really like it. And like I've been negotiating all of our contracts and I'm good at it. So I wasn't able to like initially communicate that, be like, oh no, I don't know this, this, and this, because I didn't know anything. And like, you know, we have to kind of fumble in the dark a little bit to even realize. And I think Amanda, the same thing, like she didn't know QuickBooks, she didn't know finances, and now she's like, oh, I'm good at this. I like the finances.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine all of the things that unfold, you know, just kind of living in nonprofit world too, and like how, you know, figuring out how things have been done, or how what processes are there or not.
Yeah.
You know, really staying flexible, staying open to a degree is kind of an essential life spirit saving.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I do see that like being fluent in the creative process and like being an artist has been the biggest asset ever in being an entrepreneur, because it's all like living in changing expectations and the unknown, and like I feel like I'm constantly relying on those skills of like creative thinking and innovation and, you know, being nimble and all of that. So I'm like very grateful for that skill set being in business.
And we also talked about your path as an artist in terms of spirituality as well. And I'm just curious how you would answer the question of how is your art connected with how you would define spirituality in your life?
Yeah. I would say that creating art has always been a mindfulness practice for me and a spiritual practice for me. It's also like always been the way that I process my experiences, like make meaning. And I spent a lot of time during my undergrad work at Evergreen, really like digging into like the neuroscience of the creative process of like what is actually happening in our brain when we're making art or when we're having creative process. And what I learned that is like just so relevant in my life is that what's happening when you're making art or when you're creating something is you're moving little pieces of information from different parts of your brain together and then storing them in a new place. You're like actually like alchemizing and synthesizing little thoughts or associations or memories and making something new out of it, and then putting it in a little box in your brain that's more accessible, but also where all these things are connected. And that, if I dig into that, like that is a spiritual practice that is actually bringing energy manifest on earth and making it accessible so you can live it and breathe it and like have it in your life. So now that I know that the physiology of that, I try to do that more intentionally of like, it's prayer, you know, it's like, oh, there's this that I want and there's this obstacle and there's this and there's this and this. And like, how can I really intentionally have a creative process right now of drawing or painting or moving my body where I'm just praying with these different pieces and trusting that this process will braid them together somehow and then make a new home for them where they do coexist, and that once that's in my brain, I will live that in a different way, and those things will have a relationship and come into being manifest.
So are you making, like when you use the word prayer right there, are you using that word? It almost felt like that word as you were talking was kind of synonymous with this synaptic process. Is that okay to say that, or how do you hear that?
Yeah, I think that if you're engaged in the creative process, that mental process that I was describing is happening inevitably. But when you know that it's happening and you're intentional about it, you can actually like call on the memories or the wishes or the associations that you want to come together in relationship, and you might not know what the outcome will be. But it's like, oh, I have this sense of despair about the world right now, and there's this movie that I watched that has to do with this topic, and there's this relationship I'm having with my partner right now. I know that there's like a connection here, and I have like a wish for well-being or love or whatever, and I don't know how to get from where I'm at to where I want to be. And I guess the prayer part is like, I don't have to design that path. All I have to do is like hold a space for these associations and memories and wishes to form a relationship, and they will naturally unfold into a path for me to move on.
That's a really powerful association, that the lack of needing there to be an outcome, but engaging in the process in a sense of like real, at a devotional place, both spiritually and or artistically, but like the lack of needing to insist upon an outcome, or to be disappointed if the outcome you really thought you deserved didn't manifest or something.
Yeah, totally. It's like super humbling. It's like, I know that there'll be an outcome, but I don't know what the outcome is going to be. And I have to trust the process, because if I knew the way forward and I knew what the outcome would be, I wouldn't need a process. I would just do that thing. But in those moments where I'm stuck or I don't know the way forward, why would I then listen to my little monkey brain? Like, you have, like, in order to get new information, you have to do something new and make new connections, right? And that is humbling. And it is a surrender.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that about your artistic process. That was very personal, just to how you relate to yourself as an artist, how you function as an artist. And I really just appreciate you doing the synthesis work between your spiritual life and your artistic life. Yeah. And so as we begin to wrap up, I wanted to ask you about hope and where you, as you survey the world, we could leave maybe 2020 out, I guess, in our pre-filming conversation. But where do you, as you survey the world, Olympia, your life, your business, where do you see hope? What does that look like? How would you describe it to us?
Yeah.
And you're free to define hope before you answer it too. I don't want to assume that how I might perceive that in the backdrop of my question is the same as how you would answer it.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Let's see. Wow, that's complicated. That's a good question. When I look at the world, I see like a lot of amazing people doing a lot of amazing work who are like under-resourced, undervalued. And like, I really just feel like we have all the ingredients we need, and we're like putting them in the wrong order, we're making the soup backwards. So I guess my hope is like, it feels hopeful to me that we aren't missing anything. We have everything we need. It's not like, oh, if only there were good people. Like, we have a lot of good people, and we have a lot of good ideas, and we have all the resources we need. I think it's just like a resource allocation issue in general on Earth. And I don't know. I when I was a kid, and I guess a young person, I felt like the same thing that most young people feel, that like, oh, the grown-ups like messed it up, and like, I'm gonna fix this, And then as we get older, we realize how stuck the institutions are, and how hard it is to be an adult, and how hard it is to like actually make a difference. So that is like hard to reckon with for me. But I think there's a difference between feeling hopeful and acting with hope. And I don't feel very hopeful. But I can see pockets of potential and like where there is hope. And I try to just act on that. I just try to like leverage opportunities and act as if I believe things are going to be okay. Because that's all we can do. Like, I don't want to act pessimistically. And I want to do my best to do the work that I see is needed and that I am capable of doing. And I think there's a lot of younger, less disillusioned people who have the feeling of hope. And if we can connect, you know, I think it's an intergenerational process, because I think the older you get, the more skills you have to act with hope. And you understand the world a little bit more, but you feel less hopeful. And younger people have less skills and experience, but more hope in their heart. And I feel like together it really is an intergenerational challenge of like reminding each other and teaching each other.
Well, I love that vision. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that connection with the intergenerational piece, and that I relate to that, the energy, the feeling of that, and then also having some skills to bring it forth. Yeah. So I think we'll wrap up there today, Mo.
Cool.
So thank you so much for coming by.
Yeah,
really
thanks so much.
Appreciate you being here. Appreciate the work you're doing.
Thanks.
Appreciate the ongoing vision you have for your journey with your Jewish heritage, with your teaching and arts therapy, and just with Gold Herring. And I just want to again recommend to people watching that they check out Gold Herring. Is it goldherring.com? Okay, goldherring.com. And then again, check out other episodes of Lean in Olympia at our website at Interfaith Works and our Facebook page. And we'll be back with you in a couple of weeks on June 22nd, and we'll feature actually June 29th, June 29th in June, with Executive Director of Interfaith Works, Meg Martin. So I want to thank you for being here. Mo, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And that'll wrap it up for today.